The issue is that the 49ers, as we've noted multiple times before, not just on this show, but on every other show that we've ever talked about, don't have to do squat because Brandon Aiyuk's under contract and there's 2 franchise tags looming over his head. And for the next 3 years, he's theirs. If they want him on the team, he's on the team. And so it's on Brandon
But
Aiyuk.
it could be uncomfortable.
Oh, it's already uncomfortable, Larry, and it can get really friendly real fast if they just make the deal.
It hasn't been uncomfortable in the past, but this would be uncomfortable. More times than not, the Niners have gotten these deals done.
Yep.
So they don't have an example of a guy who wanted a long-term extension, thought he was getting one, was told in the 11th hour, no, you're not getting one, show up and play at this amount. They haven't played that level of hardball yet.
They also haven't negotiated with anybody who refuses to acknowledge that he doesn't have the leverage and come down from what is a legitimately ridiculous ask. They've been dealing with reasonable actors to this point. I mean, even the Nick Bosa contract negotiations, which took the entire offseason and the entirety of the preseason, those were serious, earnest negotiations between 2 camps that actually wanted to get a deal done. You can't, when Brandon Aiyuk is out here asking to be the highest paid receiver in the NFL, it's not a reasonable ask for him. I think he's a wonderful player, and I think he deserves to be paid very close to that top 5, money. That's fine by me. I mean, it's not my money. I don't give a damn. But like the notion that he's coming out here and he wants it all, and then when the 49ers say no, he goes, well, what are you going to do about it? As if he has the leverage is preposterous, because not only does he not have the leverage, he's squandered every bit of leverage he's had up until this point. So until he comes down even just a little bit, the 49ers have no reason to come up. The ball is in his court here to actually get something done, because the 49ers, again, start fining him the day that he doesn't show up to the beginning of training camp. And they start fining him heavy if he misses any preseason games. And everyone goes, oh, well, the fines will be forgiven. The hell they will if he doesn't sign a new contract. Brandon Aiyuk could lose like 25 to 30% of what he's about to get paid by the 49ers this season if he wants to do some sort of a holdout. Now, if he wants to try to do a hold in, that's another thing. And then the union gets involved, and it might not work out for him.
For people who don't know what a hold in is, it basically means that you'd report, you'd show up, you'd go to meetings, you'd watch film. You just wouldn't take the risk of putting on pads and going on the field.
Yeah.
And
I think
you wouldn't get out there and strap it up, but you would still be lifting, running on the side, and attending meetings.
And that's something that
that's on the left when you're in the final stages.
That's right. I'm already here. I'm already negotiating. I might as well save myself some money.
Right? Usually, isn't that almost? Has there ever been a hold in that then became a holdout, and there was a parting of the ways? I can't.
Khalil Mack was really weird. Khalil Mack was really weird with the
Usually
Raiders.
It shows some kind of ability, desire for the two sides to play ball.
And I'll say this. If Brandon Aiyuk wants to just come out of the $30 million number, if he just wants to come off that, which he has no reason to want to do that unless he wants a new deal. If he just comes down into the 20s, I am certain the 49ers will come up from their offer. This is not some hard and fast thing. The issue is that both sides are acting as if their numbers are hard and fast. And the only person who can change that is Brandon Aiyuk, because the 49ers, again, have no impetus. It costs them more money to get this negotiation done than Brandon Aiyuk is costing himself money the second that this training camp starts, and he decides that, an extra $2 or $3 million a year is worth what? Tens of millions of dollars? At a certain point, he's cutting off his nose to spite his face when it comes to this negotiation. And honestly, given how everything has gone to this point, I wouldn't be surprised if he follows through on that. I find this whole thing to be embarrassing for Athletes First, his agency, more than anything else, because I don't know who would be able to, handle. There's a lot of pressure, and he's 26 years old. Like you want to cut the guy a ton of slack. His representatives have, in theory, been through this before. Athletes First is embarrassing itself right now. And you look at his agent and some of the other clients that he's had. The only person Ryan Williams, I believe is his name. The only other client, the only other client who has been in a situation of this magnitude was Josh Norman, when Josh Norman was trying to figure out what to do at the end of his Carolina tenure before he signed that big deal with Washington. I think it was 5 years, $75 million with Washington. You can say, oh, well, Williams got him that big deal in Washington. Well, he also got the Carolina Panthers to rescind a franchise tag where Josh Norman wanted to stay in Carolina. He felt like they could work out a deal. They could figure something out. And against his client's wishes, he worked out a deal somewhere else. And it's just like, what a mess. What a mess. And then you look at this Aiyuk situation, and you're like, what a mess. The second that your agent is saying, why don't you go on TikTok to help get the public on your side here, that person should be fired on the spot because they're unserious about something that's going to be a 9-figure contract. And if I'm giving somebody 9 figures of money, I want them to be serious people. And I think Brandon Aiyuk's a serious dude. I think he's getting terrible advice. And while I do think this thing gets done, I think that it's going to continue to be messier than it ever needed to be. And I think that Athletes First has to wear that because there's no track record of this of Brandon Aiyuk's representative showing good leadership in situations like this. And that's really a shame for Brandon Aiyuk.
Football is we're at a unique point in history because analytics are a big part of sports, and yet they're just starting to kind of break through into football.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring this up because we're having a hard time establishing what is the value of Brandon Aiyuk. He's a great receiver. He blocks in the run game with a vengeance. And there's receivers all over this league that don't block in the run game at all.
Right.
And then he's super tough. He catches balls across the middle. He never, ever has alligator arms or peaks. He dominates in the middle of the field where your quarterback, needs him to dominate. And he does. Warren Sharp, who's one of my favorite follows on X, says, forget counting stats as it relates to determining Brandon Aiyuk's value. Since trading for Christian McCaffrey, the 49ers throw the ball at the 32nd rate in the NFL, which means they throw the ball less than anybody else in football. That's dead last. That's right. And they operate at a very slow pace as well. They're 28th in the NFL in pace, offensive snaps per game. So when you're when you run the ball the most, pass the ball the least, and operate at one of the slowest, most deliberate paces in all of football, those are 3 factors that all put a drag on Brandon Aiyuk's stats. And he's never, and as Sharp points out accurately here, he says he's never going to put up massive numbers in that environment. He says Aiyuk ranked number 1 in the NFL in yards per target. He also ranked number 1 in the NFL in percentage of first downs or touchdowns per target. And then he finishes up by saying he's an outstanding asset in San Francisco, but we'll never see his ceiling in this offense. And that would be my question. It's like, that's the kind of the conundrum here. What's his real value? And then the other question is, take Aiyuk's name out of it. Take Debo's name out of it. Take Jawan's name out of it.
Fair enough.
Does it make sense when you take the names and the emotion of the argument, because people are tied emotionally to these players, especially if they bought their jersey. I own Aiyuk's jersey. I'm emotionally tied.
Fair enough.
But is it smart to pay $66 million to receivers when you're going to run the ball as infrequently as the 49ers do? I mean, that's the bigger overarching question. It's not about Aiyuk or Debo or JJ. It's just about, if you're going to run as much as they do, does it make sense to devote this much of a hard cap sport to receivers? What do you think?
Let's talk about Justin Jefferson for a minute, because I think that it's not even the 49ers system that lends itself to the question. I think it's an overarching question about the wide receiver position in the year 2024, 2025. Think about what the Vikings did to get Justin Jefferson. They had Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs made arguably the biggest play in Vikings history, right? It's an incredible thing. They win the playoff. It was Case Keenum, unbelievable. And they say, Stephon Diggs, interesting cat. I don't think you're worth it. I don't think you're worth what you're asking for. And they ship him off to Buffalo. And he is gets the money in Buffalo, gets the targets in Buffalo. And by the way, then Buffalo said, you know what? I don't think you're worth it anymore. And they ship him off to Houston. But
he might have a little bit of a runs hot personality, I have a feeling, too.
He's an interesting cat, was the way I phrased it. Regardless, the Minnesota Vikings looked at their situation with unquestionably an elite wide receiver and said, nah, we're good. And they went and that very draft took Justin Jefferson. I think it was 18th overall, something like that. It doesn't matter. It wasn't like number one. He wasn't like Marvin Harrison Jr. Worked out pretty well. And you and I both know that every year the wide receiver talent in the draft just gets deeper and deeper to where you got guys who are going in the third round, sometimes fourth round, day 3 guys who you would have a couple of years ago said, oh, that's a first round player. That's a second round player. This is a top 50 kind of guy. Those guys are going at, 122. It's college football can't create offensive linemen anymore. Linebackers are no good anymore. Cornerbacks are a joke at the college level because of all the cover 4, but god damn can they create some wide receivers, man. They got some dudes coming out of the, and it's every single year. So if you're asking me fundamentally, is it right to pay this guy or any guy? I would say no. I would say that wide receiver has never been more disposable. And the notion of paying a guy 12% of your salary cap as a wide receiver is kind of foolhardy. I'll give myself a counter argument here, though. Kyle Shanahan is so demanding of wide receivers. He is so meticulous in their responsibilities in the game plan that the notion that, and we're going to find out with Pearsall and Cowing this year, and we're both very high. I'm very high on Pearsall. You're very high on Cowing. We think that they have a chance to be special from day one, respectively. Kyle is so demanding of what he asks his receivers to do more than any. He's so hard on that position. He played that position. He asked them to be much like the quarterback, offensive coordinators on the field. That when you have someone who is unquestionably an elite player in the league at that position, who does all the things that you ask that position to do, which is above and beyond the responsibilities of damn near every other team. When you have somebody like that, you probably need to keep them around, because while every other team might be able to just plug and play at wide receiver, Kyle Shanahan has shown that it's a pretty rare breed who can do everything that he wants an ex-receiver to do. It is Emmanuel Sanders who they had to bring in halfway through the 2019 season to teach everybody how to be a receiver. He was effectively the wide receivers coach, which says a lot about Wes Welker, who was the wide receivers coach at the time. Kyle had no problem with Mike McDaniel taking Wes Welker when he went to Miami. And then there was a gap. There's a gap after that, after Emmanuel Sanders left, until Brandon Aiyuk upped his game, understood what was being, asked of him, grew up a little bit. Not that he was ever immature or anything, but he had to mature into his professionalism a bit, and took over that role in a big way these past 2 years with Brock Purdy at the helm, because they have a great chemistry together. To just toss that out the door because a schlub like me says that wide receivers have never been more expendable, I might be right, but how much are you willing to bet on that expendability? How much are you willing to bet on some kid that has never done it before, when it took Brandon Aiyuk 3 years to figure it out? And Brandon Aiyuk is a pretty special player. So again, we're talking about a difference when we're talking about the Niners offer and Aiyuk's ask.
It's kind of
about $5 million. They got to figure that out.
It kind of reminds me of when I was in college.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get a Jeep, and I found out it would cost a whole lot more if I was going to get a 4-wheel drive. The 4-wheel drive is going to cost a lot more, and it was going to cost a lot more insurance wise too.
No doubt.
So I sat there and I'm like, but I can't, it's a Jeep. If I'm going to go Jeep, I got to go with a 4-wheel drive.
Of course.
So I did it, bit the bullet, and spent the extra on the insurance, and the gas and all that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking to myself, yes, I'm driving around Sacramento, delivering court depositions and just going to college. I've owned this car for 5 years now. and I've only put it in 4-wheel like twice,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And yet I'm paying more money every month for 4-wheel drive.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Niners between JJ, Debo, and Aiyuk are paying much more for receivers than they're getting out of their receivers. So it doesn't seem like really good, like a smart way to go about things.
Well, and they're going to be all in on it this year. But let's be clear, moving forward, they're not all in. I mean, moving forward, one of these two wide receivers is gone. Perhaps two of them are gone. I think this is Debo Samuel's last year, regardless of anything that happens with Brandon Aiyuk. Just because he was here for a good time, not for a long time, and they're not going to give him a new contract, so they need to move on from him to get some sort of value back in return. So, I there's that. And that is a factor on why they want to get this Aiyuk deal done and not, push it down the line, because they have resigned themselves to this is it for Debo Samuel. He's given us his best years. We're going to try to get something for him at the end of this year, and we're going to move on. That means you got to have that wide receiver one. You can't be betting on Ricky Pearsall. Now maybe they feel a very different way in 6 months or 12 months from now about Pearsall or Cowing or whomever. But you have to have a number one. And by the way, I do think there's really something to be said for the chemistry on and off the field, though they're very different people off the field. The chemistry that Purdy and Aiyuk have. We've known Brandon Aiyuk now for a long time. He never talked about Jimmy Garoppolo like this. He never talked about Trey Lance like this. Obviously, it's easy to talk about Brock Purdy in glowing phrases because Brock Purdy has been marvelous since he's been the quarterback of the 49ers. But I'll remember what Brandon Aiyuk told me once. I was just hounding him for like weeks to talk to him about his chemistry with Purdy, and Purdy was great on it. And I'm like, I'm going to actually need Brandon Aiyuk to talk about this. He is a subject of this story I'm writing. And he finally broke down and he just goes, listen, I know that if I get to my spot, the ball's going to be there. And I've never felt that before. Okay, well, that matters. That kind of stuff matters. And you're about to go into contract negotiations with Brock Purdy, who doesn't have to do anything. I guess they could franchise tag him just the same way they can do it with Brandon Aiyuk, but there's no fifth-year option for Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy wants to be there, and there's no reason to think that Brock Purdy's going anywhere else or that he'll start TikToking and flaunting around with other wide receivers on other teams or going on football. That's not Brock Purdy's ballgame. He's going to sign with the 49ers. He's going to make a shit ton of money from the 49ers. But I think that he'd prefer to be in a situation with that receiver, just as Brandon Aiyuk would prefer to be in a situation with the quarterback that he trusts, one of which is Brock Purdy. Apparently another one is Jaden Daniels. But the cost certainty of getting this deal done now, I think, trumps a lot of these other concerns. I think the notion that the 49ers just want Brandon Aiyuk to play on his fifth-year option, they'll do it if they have to, but I don't think that's what they want. I don't think that's what they want at all. So